Well, brothers, sisters, glad to be here this morning. I want to tell you, I listened to your testimony on YouTube for about an hour yesterday. Was the gentleman up here the guy who was interviewing you in that? You may not remember the interview. It was, yeah, it was very moving. If you haven't heard it, I strongly encourage you to listen to. It was the pastor of a local church. Yeah, yeah. If you haven't listened to that interview, I strongly encourage you to do it. I'm one who blame Mike Williams for me being here. He is a human equivalent of a hunting dog, and I tried my best to hide from him, and he kept sniffing me out. And he's been saying for years I need to come to Birmingham, and I just couldn't get away from him. So, but I'm delighted to be here and have an opportunity to share my testimony about the wonderful work of Jesus Christ. So I was born in 1947 in Chicago. All my family on my mother's side is from Stanton, Tennessee, and they immigrated to Chicago around 1935. And my dad's is from Georgia, and his family immigrated about the same time. So I am an only child of the union between my mother and my father. My father was 31 years old when he met my mother, who was 18. And I had what has to be described as pretty much an idyllic childhood in Chicago. It was a very different time than now. My mom and dad divorced when I was 3 years old because he had an affair. And so I lived with my mother in a building that Big Mama owned. Big Mama was my maternal grandmother. Big Mama was 4 feet 9 inches tall. She tipped the scales at maybe 98 pounds. But it was the force of her personality. Big Mama didn't say much, but she loved much. And my strongest memory of Big Mama was seeing her every night, kneeling at the cocktail table, praying. That's my strongest memory of Big Mama. Well, she just poured love into me. My mom, so we lived in the building that Big Mama owned, and we lived in the basement apartment. Is 3-story building with 5 apartments. We lived in the basement, which was a coal bin and an apartment. In those days, they would dump coal into a cellar, and you could use that to heat the house. And my mother's older sister lived in the first floor apartment. Big Mama lived on the second floor, and her son, Uncle Preston, who's 99 years old and still drives a car. And Big Mama lived until she was 99. So Uncle Preston lived right next door to Big Mama, and on the third floor was Aunt Peggy, who was like my mother's sister, but they were really cousins, but they grew up together. So so I lived with Big Mama and all my cousins in that big house on Fulton Street in Chicago, and it was magical. I and then my mother got married to Bob Patterson, who was the 19th of 20 children. It's the same husband and father, and he was built like the Oscar statue. Okay, I'm not kidding. And but when I grew up in Chicago, I only saw white people on television or in certain places because the community that I grew up in was completely black. All the stores were black owned. The grocery store, the dry goods store, the cleaners, all of them. I've rarely interacted with white people except on a very official level, be a police officer maybe. And we just stayed in the black community, and it was a blast. We had so much fun, and we didn't have money, but we were rich. Never lacked food, never lacked love. I cannot be one of those people who said, "Well, I'm bitter because I wasn't loved." I can't say that. You'd have to slap me if I said anything like that. But before I get into that, I just got to tell you two quick jokes, okay? And then I'm going to get into the details. All right, so how many of you are golfers? Okay. So man and wife are standing outside the chapel doors. Inside is filled with celebrants. And they're waiting for the processional music to begin so they can walk down the aisle. And the bride is standing next to her groom, and he's sweating and shifting from foot to foot. And she looks at him and she says, "Honey, what's wrong?" And he said, "So I have a confession to make." She said, "What?" He said, "Sweetheart, I'm a fanatic golfer. And I'm just scared to death I'm going to make you a golf widow. Every chance I get, I'm going to be either on the driving range or the putting green or the golf course. And I'm just scared." And she said, "Oh, honey, it's all right." And she puts her arm around him. And she, after a while, she says, "Well, sweetheart, I have a confession to make also." And he said, well, what?" She took a deep breath and she said, "I'm a hooker." And he said, "Babe, that's all right. You just keep the left arm straight." So one more. We got any hunters out there? All right, got a few. Good. Well, uh, this guy, he's a big time New York investment banker. He loves to go hunting up in the mountains in Vermont after their elk, and so he looks at his calendar. He realizes he's going to be traveling so much he's going to miss the season. So he decides, "I'm going to drive up early," even though he knows it's a heavy fine if you're caught and you can't get a license for 2 years. And he never in his adult life gone 1 year without hunting. But he's just desperate. So he sneaks up there, parks his pickup truck with the hoist, and he's tracking this buck with these huge antlers, and he just can't believe his luck. So he tracks him, and the elk jumps over this fence. He takes aim, one shot, bam, elk drops. So excited, he gets his pickup truck, backs up to the fence, opens the gate, and is about to drive in when this old farmer came shuffling out and says, "Sonny, what are you doing?" He said, "Well, I just shot my buck, and I'm going to load him in my truck." He said, "That's my buck. That's not your buck." The guy said, "Well, I shot him." He said, "Yeah, but you shot him on my property. This is my buck." And the guy said, "Look, I want you to know I have all the best lawyers in New York. If you mess with me, I promise you I will hound you to death and I will wind up owning your house." And the old man looks at him and kind of smiles. I said, "You know, you obviously not from around here. Around here, we don't settle our disputes this way." And the guy looked, said, "What do you do?" He said, "Well, I kick you in the groin 3 times. And then if you're still standing, you kick me in the groin 3 times. And we keep doing that, and the last one standing gets to keep the buck." And he looks at this skinny old man. It looks like he's 105 years old. And he figures, what harm can this do me? And he knows that if he gets caught, there's no hunting for 2 years, plus it's a $10,000 fine. So he said, "Okay, all right, let's do it." And so the old man shuffles over to him. Bam! Oh, this old guy kicked harder than he thought was possible. He takes a deep breath. Said, "Okay, old man, 2 more kicks." And old man got this little grin. He said, "Okay." Bam! Oh my goodness! He almost loses his footing, takes a deep breath. He says, okay, old man, one more kick, it is my turn. The old man looks at him. He says, okay. Bam! This time the guy falls to his knees, takes a deep breath. Finally, he's able to stand up. And he looks at the old man and he says, okay, my turn. Old man says, well, you can have the buck. All right. So, growing up in Chicago under what I considered to be an ideal childhood, I was greatly loved, always had great food on the table. Big Mama's cooking was out of this world. Never used a recipe. She was just a fabulous cook. Everything was wonderful. And then I went to a high school in Chicago called Wendell Phillips, and it was what they call a predominantly black high school, which meant that there was uh, one Puerto Rican kid and one white kid in the whole high school. And I was doing really well because my family had always stressed education. Always, you got to study, you got to study, and it was my bent. I just liked to study. So one day, my first marking period, I made the honor roll, and my friend said, "Hey, Billy, man, you made the honor roll." I said, "Yeah, isn't that hip?" He said, "No, man, everybody's gonna think you're a sissy." And I went, "Oh, that means I'd be fighting every day." So I then set out to fail every course in high school. Deliberate decision. But there was one taught by Professor Donald H. Smith, who had a PhD in education and had devoted himself to teach in the inner city schools. And he, in cooperation with the principal, and all the staff was black, okay? He wanted to handpick 50 students, and that's when the classrooms were eight across, no, six across and eight deep. So he got to pick 48 students, and for some reason he picked me. Uh, well, in his class, he made us work. He kept talking about a future that was bigger than our neighborhood. And I don't know how he did it, but he kept bringing into our class successful black people. He brought Gwendolyn Brooks, who was a very famous poet. He brought in, um, not Hank Aaron, Jackie Robinson. I mean, he was always bringing in these people to talk about what you could do with your life. And at my time, my biggest goal was to work with the Postal Service. That was you couldn't be fired because it was with the federal government. That was my biggest aspiration. But then in Dr. Smith's class, we always call him Dr. Smith or Professor Smith. I began to think, wow, there's another world out there, just maybe. All right, so one day, and my mom and dad never lived further than, after the divorce, 2 blocks from each other. My mom felt it was very important for me to have my dad in my life. So she made sure that she lived close to him, even when she remarried. And one day she said, hey, Pops is coming, your dad is coming to pick you up. And I go, Pops is coming to pick me up? Why? She said, I don't know. Well, they had a plan. They had put me in the previous summer in or actually it was the same summer, in the what is called the lab school, which is the high school extension of the University of Chicago. But I hated that place. I was only one of only 3 black students there, and these were all the sons and daughters of University of Chicago professors and doctors. I mean, they had a privileged existence, and I'd walk in and they were saying, "Oh, it was so good seeing you in the Swiss Alps. Wasn't that fun skiing?" And I'm going, I just could not relate. And I told my mom and dad, if you try to send me to this school, I am going to run away. And I meant it because I was scared. So one day, my mom said, well, your dad's coming to pick you up. I go, okay, why? She said, I don't know. Well, she said, you had to ask him. So I got in the car, and and she and so we're driving, and I say, hey, Pops, where we going? Not a word. He didn't say hi, son. He didn't say anything. Now we started driving from the south side of Chicago, and at that time, blacks lived on the south side and the west, near west side. So and downtown is sort of the center. So we hit downtown, and now we're continuing north, and we cross Randolph, which is the dividing line between the black and white communities. Everything north of Randolph is white and very upscale. So when we cross Randolph, I said, Dad, where are we going? Not a word. He drove me up, parked next to a curb in an area called Lincoln Park. He turned to me and he said, get out. I go, what? Get out. So I got out of the car. I'm standing on this curb. He drives away. I have no idea where I am. And this young white girl starts kind of skipping down the sidewalk, and she said, hi, are you Billy McCurine? I said, well, yeah. Who are you? She said, I'm Lori Negronita. I'm your greeter. I said, greeter? Where am I? She said, you're at the Francis Parker School. I said, well, why am I here? She said, you don't know why you're here? I said, no, I don't know why I'm here. She said, well, you're here to take the entrance exam. Well, I passed. I got into Francis Parker, and it changed my life. So I went there, graduated. From there, I went to Dartmouth College, and right around the time of my senior years when they began having the urban riots, Watts, Huff, Chicago, you name it. And I get to college, and I'm one of 16 entering black students in the class of 1969. And that's the largest class of black students Dartmouth had ever had in its history. And it doubled the black student population at Dartmouth. Well, at Dartmouth, I became increasingly angry and increasingly bitter about the racial situation in the United States. So by the time I was at, now I had, by now, my senior year, I had won the Rhodes Scholarship. And when I went to my final, you have local interviews, then you have regional interviews, and then you have a national interview. And so at the regional interview was in Boston. And I mean, there were hot shots for, I think there were the final eight, two from, I think, somewhere between 8 and 12. And one of them had been on the cover of Sports Illustrated as a Yale student. So I was taught when I grew up to be on time means to be 5 minutes early. On time is late. So I go to the interview at the top of what was then the John Hancock building on the 50th floor. And because I was early and dressed, they thought I was one of the bartenders. So they handed me an apron and said, come on, we got to hurry up and start pouring drinks. So that's what I did. I started pouring drinks. And then when I saw these other Rhodes Scholars come, then I took off the apron, put on my suit coat again. I had one suit, but it was a nice suit. And went through the interview, and then I won. And so I was the first from Illinois, actually, to get a Rhodes Scholarship. It was great, but man, I got so bitter, so bitter. And I had done very well at Dartmouth, but by the end of my senior year, I was so angry, I dropped out. I just walked away from campus and flew back to Chicago. But I had studied so hard and I had so many credits that even without that last semester, I had enough to graduate. And so they mailed my diploma. And I wrote the Rhodes Scholarship Trust and said, I don't want to come. And I started working at 35th and State, which is one of the roughest street corners in Chicago. And I worked at a service station that Bob Patterson, my stepdad, owned. Now, he and my mother had been divorced for at least 10 years, but he was He was a good man. So I worked for him. And I saw such misery at that corner. I said, man, there's got to be something better. And so I'm cleaning this man's, in those days, the cars had oil filler caps. So, and you had to change them out periodically. I was changing out this man's oil filler cap, and something pulled my face to the sky. And I saw these shafts of sunlight pierce the clouds. And instantly I understood that God existed and that he loved me. And that began a spiritual journey for me. And then, so I decided I'd write the Oxford Trust, the Rhodes Scholarship Trust, said, look, I made a mistake. I want to accept a scholarship. And by now, they had to because it's too late to choose anybody else. But how God protects, we used to say growing up, God protects fools and little children. Well, you know what category I fell in. So I went off to England. It was a great time. I really got a chance to just think through life. And I had met my wife to be just before I left. And I came back and decided I wanted to go to become a professor of political science on the college level. So I enrolled in the JFK School of Government at Harvard. And then and my wife was by now married. This was our first year of marriage. And one morning I wake up and I get this tiny, tiny desire to go to law school. Now, a parking lot separated the law school from the School of Government. And I told Dana, I said, I think maybe I'll apply to the law school. She said, well, okay. Now, I had never, ever thought about the practice of law. But this is just to show that the sovereign God pursues us when we don't know that we're being pursued. He sovereignly opened doors for us that we don't even recognize or appreciate. So I wind up getting accepted into Harvard. I go there, have a great time at Harvard, and then I get a job with what was then the largest law firm in San Diego. It was then called Gray, Carey, Ames, and Fry. It's now called DLA Piper. And I knew that I wanted to live in San Diego because my senior year in college, I took a trip that led me down to San Diego. And as I hit a part of San Diego called Mission Bay, there was a voice, audible but not out loud, said, "This is my home." And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I had this passion to live in San Diego. It had meant nothing to me before then. 3 hours later, I met my wife and we were at a house party. This voice, audible but not out loud, said, "This is my wife." And I knew that I had to marry this woman. Now, it never occurred to me that God was speaking to me. That was just a foreign thought. As soon as I got to college, I gave up the church. In Big Mama's house, you went to church on Sunday. Big Mama did not run a democracy. So I went to church every Sunday, but it never meant anything to me. I was the kid who sat back there and told jokes during church. But so as soon as I got to college, I gave up going to church immediately, except on those occasions when I went back home, then of course, I'd go to church with Big Mama. Well, I get married, I started practicing a law firm, not thinking about God in any way. And I now have a house and 2 kids. I mean, life is good. My mom bought her house 3 years before I bought my house, and she'd been working all her life to get it. I'm not 1 year out of law school, and I buy a house, which was 3 times as expensive as the house she bought. So I'm walking through the house one Saturday morning. Dana and the boys are out. And the next thing I know, I am on my knees praying. Now, guys, this is strange. I was not a praying guy. I meditated, but I didn't pray. But I found myself on my knees and I said, well, God, I don't even know if you exist. But I do know I don't like to go to church. I don't like to read the Bible. I don't like to sing hymns, and I don't like to hang with Christians. I said, but I do love to play squash. If you are who you say you are, make me love these things more than I love to play squash. Because I played squash with a passion. I learned it in England. I was just a fanatical squash player. And after I prayed that, it's like I was in a trance. I got up and I kept thinking, what was that about? And I didn't say anything to anybody about it because it just seemed so strange. 2 weeks later, I'm in bed, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm sleeping soundly. And then all of a sudden I wake up. And I'm tossing and turning for about 15 minutes, and I can't get back to sleep. I can't understand what's going on. And then this thought came and it said, maybe God is trying to talk to me. I'm going, what? So I eased myself up in bed. What a strange thought, hoping Dana wouldn't wake up. And I said in my mind, well, God, if this is you, what do you want? Write Steve Carlson. Well, Steve was a good friend of mine, and he had just left the law firm to become a lobbyist in Sacramento, our state capital. I didn't have anything to write him about, but I eased out of bed, went into the kitchen, and we have one of our tables, and there was like a summer picnic table with the bench. And so it was pressed against the wall, and I'm sitting there with a legal pad, waiting to write Steve Carlson, having no idea what to say. And now it's 2:25 in the morning. And out of frustration, I say impertinently, God, if you want me to write Steve Carlson, you're going to have to show me what to say. As soon as I said that, the wall in front of me, which was, I could reach out and touch it almost, just dissolved away like a giant TV screen. And I'm looking, and it's a nighttime scene. There's a man on a like an elevated plateau of a mountain. He's on his knees. He's obviously praying, and there's blood and sweat all over his forehead. Now, somehow in my spirit, I knew this was Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he had just said something, but I could not hear what he had said. But then there was this voice above him that said, certainly, my son, you do not have to die on the cross. But I want you to know that 1,947 years from now, a young child named Bill McCurine will be born. If you don't die on the cross, he will never know me. But if you do die on the cross, he might come to know me. And there was that much hesitation. And Jesus said, that's enough. I'll go. That was the first time that I'd ever realized that I was a wretched sinner and that Jesus Christ had died for me. If you had asked me the day before was I was a Christian, I would have said, of course. Why? Well, based on my moral conduct, I'm not the best man, but I'm probably in the top 10 percentile. You know, I'm pretty good. I don't rape, I don't murder. But I understood for the first time that I was a sinner, that my sins had separated me from God, and that there was nothing I could do to breach that gap. Only Jesus' death and resurrection could breach that gap for me. And so I'm sitting on this bench, and I fall off the bench, and I just start sobbing. And I try to muffle the sound so as not to awaken my wife. How would I answer the question, what's wrong? So I lay on that ground weeping for like 20, 30 minutes until I was exhausted. But finally I stopped crying. And brothers, it's like God had come and flushed out a sewer. And I felt clean on the inside. I knew that somehow Christ had entered my life and made me new. Now, I don't ever remember having heard the phrase born again at that time. I don't remember that. But I'm sitting there and I felt like I'm born again. I'm a new person. And so this is Saturday, and all of a sudden I had this incredible desire to read the Bible, go to church, sing hymns, and hang out with Christians. Out of the blue. So the next day is Sunday. I need to go to church, but I don't know where to go. But we had, in those days, the yellow pages. I knew that there was a church called College Avenue Baptist Church because our older son was in a gifted school program for, he was like 3 or 4 years old. So, and we had to pass that every time we took him to the program. I knew the name, college something. So I went through the yellow pages and found out what time they met, bathed the boys, dressed them, and my wife said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to church. I'm taking the boys. We're going to church." You know, the church? Okay. And at that time, she went riding every Sunday with her father. She and her father were extremely close. So they went off cycling, and the boys and I went to church. And the church had a tape ministry, cassette tapes, and for $1 you could get whatever one. Just a wall of tapes, and I had a little cassette player, and I get like 5 tapes. I got a Bible, and I just could not get enough of the Word of God. And one day I'm listening to one of the tapes, and it's by Dawson Trotman, and the tape was called "The Morning Hour," and he was talking about the importance of having a quiet time with God the first thing in the morning. And I said, yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to do that. So I got my Bible. I started waking up at 5 o'clock every morning, 5:30, and I'd read. And I just started first book, Genesis. And for the first time in my life, when I read it, it began to make sense to me. Now, I haven't stopped my quiet time since then. Over 50 years, 40 years, I may have missed 2 weeks cumulatively, but it's like my lifeline to get into the Word of God. I just read it and soak it up, and it was astounding to me that the more I read, the more convicted I was of my sin. The closer I grew to Christ, the more convicted I was of my desperate need for Him. The more I studied the Bible and prayed, the more I realized it was not about rules and it was not about religion. It was about a relationship with the living God. And that, and, and so the first thing I did, it was just start repenting of the bad things I'd done. Now, people who knew me at the time would say, I'm pretty sure, "Oh, Bill McCurine, he's a good guy, moral, upstanding," and that's how I viewed myself. I did not realize what a sinner I was. And I came across this verse in Isaiah 64. It says, this, going through my quiet time, I'm finally up to the book of Isaiah, and he said, "Your righteous acts are like filthy rags to me." And I have a Strong's Concordance. This is before the days where you had all your stuff on the phone. And I opened the Strong Concordance. What did it mean by filthy rags? And understand that in the Hebrew language, it means menstruation garments. You know how disgusting those are. And I said, that's how my righteousness is to God. And I was stung to my heart. Every religion in the world teaches us to repent of our sins. Christianity is the only religion that requires us to repent of our righteousness. that if I think I am acceptable to God because of my right behavior, my ethical behavior, my principles, I am surely bound to hell. I am acceptable to God only because I am covered by the blood of his holy and righteous Son, Jesus Christ. No other reason. God did not save me because I was this cute little bundle of brown joy in Chicago. He did not save me because he said, well, one day he's going to be talking to YBL in Birmingham. No. God saved me out of his sovereign will because he loved me. Now, out of that, I try to live rightly, not to earn his favor. That favor has been earned through Jesus Christ. He looks at me and he sees first his son. First his son. Now, let me tell you how this helped me. I'll tell you one of the ways it helped me. So, white people had never been a part of my experience until I reached high school. And then when I got to college, I told you I became very, very bitter. And then God saved me. And I thought that I was righteous, and he showed me that I was a sinner and I'm not righteous. That what I must do is live for him every day. And one day I'm waiting to meet a guy for breakfast. I'm in Mission Valley at the Mission Valley Inn, and I say to God in my time, I said, God, I'm willing to die for you. And he said, Bill, I know, but are you willing to live for me? Man, I had to process what that meant. Every day was devoted to somehow living for God. And that's a process, gentlemen, we just work it out bit by bit, bit by bit. God does not want part of us, he wants all of us. He doesn't owe us anything, we owe him everything. So one day I'm talking to my wife. We now live in the house we now live in. Things are going well. My law practice is really going well. And I start bragging to my wife. I've got a godly wife. Now, we had a habit of praying together on different sides of the bed. I prayed and she prayed back and forth. And one day I'm praying, God, please make me the best trial lawyer in San Diego. And as I'm praying this, I could feel these penetrating eyes. And I looked up, and my wife's eyes were wide with horror. With horror. She said, I can't support you in that prayer. I said, what do you mean you can't support me in that prayer? I'm the main breadwinner here. I'm the one. She said, I don't know if God wants you to be the best trial lawyer in San Diego. I just know that he wants you to live for Christ. Man, I was so angry at that woman. I mean, really, I didn't speak to her for 2, maybe 3 days. And then the Spirit just convicted me, Bill, you know. I knew, and the reason I was angry is I knew she was right. I didn't want to deal with it, though, because my idol, or one of my idols, was success, worldly success. I wanted men to look at me as I passed down the street and say, man, that Bill McCurine, he just won such and such a trial. Okay. Now, outwardly, I was very humble, but inwardly, I was really driven by pride and a desire to be successful in the eyes of the world. So now my wife and I are in the kitchen talking. I don't know where the kids are. Maybe they're in bed. But I start off bragging a little bit under the cover of praising God. And I said, you know, babe, God has really blessed me. I haven't lost a trial in 12 years. And I was expecting my wife to say, well, of course. You're such a godly man. So I'm getting ready to have all this love and praise heaped on me. And she starts off just like I expected. She said, of course. And I'm getting ready. Go ahead, lay it on me, baby. Lay it on me. She said, of course, God cannot trust you with a failure. I'm embarrassed to tell you I blew up. I was so angry at her, angry because she had nailed me to the cross. She had absolutely taken my idol and smashed it to the ground. How dare she? She's supposed to be my helpmeet. I didn't speak to her for 3 days. Now I don't have to worry about it. And I know I didn't speak to her for 3 days. And then God, and she was just as sweet. She didn't say anything. She didn't. And when she said, of course, God couldn't trust you with a failure, she wasn't snide. She said it with loving gentleness. And she tiptoed around me for 3 days. And then the Spirit just convicted me. Convicted me. And so one night, for the first time, I got down on my knees by the bed and I said, God, I'm coming to you trembling. I put my law practice in your hands to do what you want. And I said, if you can, please be as merciful as possible and still accomplish your purpose. And when I said that, gentlemen, I was trembling, just trembling. Well, guys, my practice took a nosedive. I, I couldn't win a trial. And once I was a trial in federal court and I'd done such a good job, they wanted to nominate me as trial lawyer of the year. But they couldn't because I'd lost the trial, even though man, it was outstanding. Another trial, I was cross-examining the defendant's expert, and the judge called the lawyers to the sidebar and he said, McCurine, you're making this guy bleed out of every part of his body. And I was tearing their expert to pieces. I said, okay, Your Honor, just 2 more questions and I'll be done. And I lost the trial. And the jury said to, uh, the case was a roadway design case. And I had argued that the state had designed this particular interstate in such a way that the off-ramp created accidents because cars are driving at a high speed on the access road and coming down the ramp. It fed accidents, and it was true. And the jury turned to the lawyer for the state of California and said, you fix that road. And I lost. And today at Sorrento Valley Road is the design that I put up as what should have been. Isn't that something? So, although I was losing, my reputation kept rising. Gentlemen, that's when I learned that God is responsible for our reputation. We are responsible for our character. And if God has to put me through the ringer to accomplish his purpose, God make it so. I do not want to be a successful lawyer in hell. Hell is full of good and successful people. Lord, I just need you to keep a hold on me because you know how I am, how sinful I am. Please don't loosen your grip. And I can remember being in a Bible study with this, at the time he was an old black guy compared to me, and we were talking about God's faithfulness, and he said, well, you have to understand, God's grip don't slip. And I just held on to that. And then, next thing you know, I'm on the bench. But let me tell you, for 7, 8 years, guys, it was rough going. My income seemed to drop to zero for 7 and 8 years. And yet, Somehow we got all the kids through school. We never were late on a mortgage payment. Now, I got to tell you one quick story and then I'm going to stop. And the purpose is to let you know that God sovereignly works in our lives to make us realize that it's all about Jesus Christ. It's not about our success. It's not about our contacts. It's not about our wealth. It's about Jesus. And he has to strip away everything until we learn it's about Jesus. So we bought the house that we now live in. The real estate agent was a fraud. So we wound up having our house that we thought had been sold so that we could buy our current house. Didn't sell, he lied. So we had the mortgage from the old house. We had the mortgage on the new house. And in order to get the new house, we had to take a swing loan from the Bank of California. Now, this is when Jimmy Carter was president and the interest rates were through the roof. So the mortgage rates were 9%, okay? And we got the heirs of the estate to take back a second trust deed at 13.5% for $50,000. So I'm paying on the interest only on the swing loan, and my mortgage on the first house and mortgage on the second house. And despite the amount of money that I was making as a lawyer, we were just barely making it. And there were times when I would come home and there would be bags of groceries on the front door. One of my brothers in the Christian community would just come, they would never say anything. They'd leave the groceries and they'd disappear. Well, I went to, get a loan, consolidate the loans, pay off the swing loan, and I went to Les Sleeper, before I went to Les Sleeper, I went to these mortgage people, and they looked at my income and they said, oh, boy, you won't have any problem getting a loan. This is easy. And I felt it was too. Couldn't get a loan. And each one of them would come back and say, I don't understand it. I can't get you a loan. The loan on the second deed of trust to the heirs had to be paid off the last day of the business year of whatever the year was. I don't even know. Let's just call it 1995. It is now, and the last business year day was on December 29th, a Friday. As of December 15th, I had no loan. So we're going to lose the house. And the whole time, my wife and I kept saying, well, we'll just trust God. He gave it to us. He can take it away. So I'm coming back from the gym. My head is down, and I meet this guy named Les Sleeper, and he said, man, you look down. What's up? And I don't know why I opened up to him. And he said, I can get you a loan. Yeah, Les, I've been trying for 5 years. He said, I can get you a loan. Now, this is 15 days. I mean, at the fastest, it takes 30 days. He said, I can get you the loan. Gentlemen, he brought me a check on Friday, December 29 at 3:20. The banks in those days closed at 4 o'clock. I rushed to the bank, gave them the check at 3:40, and got the mortgage papers back. And I called my wife from a payphone. They don't have cell phones in. And I said, babe, we just paid off the second deed of trust and we got the mortgage loan. And I'm standing on the corner crying. She's on the other end crying. God is faithful. So I want to say to the brother out there, maybe you're sitting on the fence and thinking, my good works will make it. I want you to imagine that you're trying to jump across the Grand Canyon under your own power. And you may jump out much further than I can, but you'll never reach the other side. That's what it's like trying to get to God under our own righteousness. Don't do that. Don't wait. And then to the brother who's struggling and you wonder where God is, or is he showing up in your life? Is he going to be faithful? God is always faithful. Well, so he may not come when we want him, but what? He comes right on time. Thank you.